Part 1. Introduction. The history of the Camorra is one of the darkest and most deeply rooted in Italy's social fabric. It did not originate from a great crime, a boss, or an act of revenge. It was born out of poverty, hunger, and inequality that, for centuries, shaped the destiny of a people. Welcome to Anime Oscure. I am Alex Nevi. Today we are in Naples, a splendid yet tormented city where beauty coexists with neglect, and where for centuries the state failed to guarantee justice and rights. It is in this power vacuum that the Camorra took root, a criminal organization that has never had just one face but 1,000, that never stopped but transformed. From neighborhood gangs to a parallel economic system, from arbitrary justice to the armed wing of global business. This documentary is not a celebration, nor a legend. It is a documented investigation built on historical, judicial, and journalistic sources. A journey spanning over 2 centuries of history, analyzing how the Camorra managed to survive monarchies, revolutions, world wars, regimes, and republics. From the first clans in Bourbon prisons to the feuds of Scampia, from the Bella Società Riformata to the toxic waste empire, from control of local markets to alliances with Colombian cartels and international mafias. Every chapter in this story tells of a phase of transformation. Every protagonist, knowingly or not, has contributed to strengthening or fighting against a system that still today influences the lives of thousands. And yet, beyond the numbers, verdicts, and anti-mafia operations, one question remains. How is it possible that after over 2 centuries the Camorra still exists? To answer, we must start at the beginning, when Naples, amid famines and revolts, began producing not only art and culture, but also organized crime. Part 2. Origins in the late 1700s. Naples, late 1700s. One of the most populous cities in Europe, a capital of both splendor and decay. But beneath this facade of art and history lay another reality, one of extreme poverty, neighborhoods abandoned by the state, and deep social injustice. The Neapolitan poor lived crammed together in inhuman conditions, trapped in a city divided between light and a shadow that seemed to swallow it whole. In this context, violence was not an exception, but a daily condition of survival. There was not yet a Camorra as we know it today, not yet an organization, but there were bands with criminal tendencies, small scattered groups tied to markets, ports, and the Bourbon prisons. The prisons were more than just detention centers, they were true laboratories of power. There, an unwritten code developed, made of respect, revenge, and protection. It was a parallel justice, a law of the strongest, born from the void left by the state in the poorest districts. Those who dominated these circuits relied not only on brute force, it was a lethal mix of intimidation, charisma, and territorial control. At that time, Camorra was not yet the name of an organization, but a way of living, a behavior, a code of honor. In the Bourbon period, doing Camorra meant imposing oneself through extortion, running gambling, prostitution, collecting pizzo, protection money, in markets. Already in the first half of the 19th century, authorities noted the presence of camorristi as men who controlled entire neighborhoods, especially in working-class areas. These prisons, these streets, were the breeding ground for a power that grew in the shadows. Hierarchies, initiation rites, and primitive bonds were born, preparing the ground for something bigger. It was not yet a mafia, at least not as we know it, but a cultural and social broth from which a lasting criminal structure would emerge. What was taking shape was not just a group, but a system, an illegal alternative to the state, one that regulated conflicts, distributed resources, and offered protection in exchange for obedience and money. In this institutional vacuum, in this absence of social justice, the deepest roots of the Camorra were planted. Even before its formal birth, everything was already there. Territorial control, violence as a tool of power, and the awareness that crime was not just survival, but affirmation. Part 3: Birth of the Bella Società Riformata. To understand how these disorganized gangs became a structured and enduring organization, we must look at what happened a few decades later, when the Camorra began to take shape with a name, precise rules, and an internal organization that made it unique in the Italian criminal panorama. Thus was born the Bella Società Riformata. Naples, 1820. An era of political tensions, revolts, and unstoppable popular discontent. Liberal ideas began to spread, but central power was weak and fragile. In this void, space opened for new forms of parallel power. It was precisely in this unstable climate that what is considered the first true Camorra structure was born, the Bella Società Riformata. It was not a simple gang, but a structured organization with strict internal rules, precise hierarchies, and codified initiation rituals. Those who wanted to join had to undergo an initiation rite inspired by the Masonic models of the time. The Zumpata. The Zumpata was not a game, it was a duel combining violence and loyalty, an extreme test of courage and obedience. Only by passing it did one become a full member, part of something bigger and feared. The Bella Società Riformata did not yet have the characteristics of the modern mafia, but represented a fundamental qualitative leap. It was a widespread network that influenced daily life in Naples' poorest neighborhoods. Each district had its own leader, deciding who could work, who had to be punished, and who deserved protection. The very name of the organization, the Beautiful Reformed Society, revealed its ambition to appear as an alternative order, an internal institution that replaced the absence of the state and the law. It was not just a system of power, but a system of distorted values based on respect, revenge, and honor. Values transmitted through violence and implacable omertà, code of silence. The structure was pyramidal. At the top was the capo società, head of society, supported by a network of sub-leaders and affiliates. Rules were strict. Betrayal meant death. Speaking to authorities was an unforgivable offense. This ensured omertà not only among affiliates, but in the entire subjugated population. The Bella Società Riformata survived and adapted for decades, growing alongside the political instability of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Part 4: The Unification of Italy and Political Alliances. When in 1860 Naples was annexed to the Kingdom of Italy, the Camorristi were already so deeply rooted that they became necessary actors in maintaining order in the city. The provisional authorities used them to control the streets, an episode destined to deeply mark the relationship between criminality and political power in the decades to come. The Bella Società Riformata was the first true step towards the modern Camorra, an organization that would survive historical changes, infiltrate institutions, and transform crime into a system. In the next chapter, we will see how, with the unification of Italy, the Camorra managed to insert itself into the new state's mechanisms, collaborating with the authorities while simultaneously strengthening its power. The Camorristi gained legitimacy that would have devastating consequences for post-unification Italy. It's 1860. Giuseppe Garibaldi arrives in Naples, marking a historic turning point for the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. The Bourbons abandon the city without a fight, leaving an institutional vacuum that risked descending into chaos. The old security structures collapsed, the administration was in disarray, and the streets became no man's land. In this void, it was the Camorra that took the upper hand. Liborio Romano, Minister of the Interior of the Provisional Government, made a controversial choice. To maintain public order, he relied on Camorra leaders, granting them legitimacy and power in exchange for collaboration. Among them, Gennaro Abbatemaggio, a well-known Camorrista, was even appointed head of police. The logic was simple and cynical. Those who control the neighborhoods can prevent unrest. But this decision marked a point of no return. The criminal system, which until then had operated in the shadows, now obtained public legitimization. This collaboration between the Camorra and the state was not an isolated case. In the post-unification period, Camorristi infiltrated more and more into the mechanisms of power, participating in elections, supporting local candidates, imposing control over public contracts and supplies. Their influence grew, fueled by the social chaos accompanying the unification of Italy. Part 5. The Viterbo Trial and Cultural Myth. An emblematic episode of this phase is the Viterbo Trial of 1911, the first time the Italian state tried to strike the Camorra as a unified organization. Dozens of defendants were brought to trial in a case that had unprecedented media coverage. The lead defendant was Enrico Alfano, known as Enricone, considered one of the most influential bosses of the time. But the trial did not wipe out the Camorra. On the contrary, it strengthened its myth. In those years, the Camorra was not just crime, it was a cultural phenomenon. It entered novels, popular songs, and theatre. The line between reality and fiction blurred. The Camorristi were feared, yes, but also respected, seen as men of honor, defenders of the poor against an oppressive state. A distorted but powerful and entrenched image. With the unification of Italy, the Camorra changed face, from a disorganized urban gang to an organized structure, from a local phenomenon to a widespread power system. The first crackdowns and convictions did not affect its ties to politics and the economy, which continued to guarantee it protection and influence. Part 6. Fascism and temporary suppression. With the rise of fascism, Benito Mussolini presented himself to the country as the champion of order and legality. Among his declared objectives was the final eradication of criminal organizations that still dominated vast areas of southern Italy. In 1927, Prefect Cesare Mori, the feared Iron Prefect, was appointed. His mission was clear: eradicate the Sicilian mafia. This model of severe repression was also extended to the Neapolitan Camorra. Fascist authorities adopted a zero-tolerance policy. Dozens of Camorristi were imprisoned, local associations were dissolved, gambling houses and power circles closed. Regime propaganda celebrated these blows as victories of the state over crime. But the reality was more complex. Unlike the Sicilian mafia, with its well-defined rural and family structure, the Camorra was urban, fragmented into dozens of small autonomous clans, often in conflict with one another. This made repression less effective, almost impossible to achieve definitively. Many Camorristi adapted quickly, blending into civil society, creating opaque relationships with the regime. Some gang leaders were even hired as enforcers for local fascist squads, receiving protection and immunity in return. Others chose to temporarily suspend their most visible activities, only to resume them later with greater discretion. The Camorra was not defeated. It transformed, went silent, but continued to exist in the shadows. Fascism did not understand, or perhaps pretended not to understand, that the Camorra was not just a criminal phenomenon but also a social response from a people trapped in misery and neglect. Repression was violent, yes, but devoid of structural interventions on the root causes: unemployment, lack of services, endemic corruption. When World War II broke out, the regime believed it had erased organized crime from the South, but just a few months of post-war chaos were enough for old balances to re-emerge strongly. With the fall of fascism, the streets of Naples filled with new desperation, and the Camorra once again found fertile ground to be reborn.